March 1st. I'm going to turn off my camera. And what I'm showing here on my one screen are the summary of the notes from last time. Last time we ended up covering quite a few PRs and quite a bit of discussion. Last week on the 22nd, we had a PR 336, 332, 333, 296, and 341. And this one in particular, Prince was talking about Service Tunnel Private Link and these examples he had put into the SONiC HLD. I sent these out in the meeting notes, and it's also in the document. And then we also had 346 by Vladimir. And then this week, I understood from Prince that Nvidia wanted to present 1265 from the SONiC repo. Is that correct, Prince?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
And Marian, yeah, okay. Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
No,
What were you saying, Chris?
Could you repeat the questions? All I was going to say. No.
Oh, yeah. PR 1265 in the SONiC repo, not the Dash repo. So I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting if that's still what we'd like to do, Prince and Marian.
So actually, it's not Marian is going to present it today. So it's.
Is it Oleksandr who's presenting?
Yeah.
Yay! All right. Me. Awesome.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen, and I think
I can see it. Can everybody else see?
I can see your screen.
I can see.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what I want to present today is the CRM high-level design update for Dash API. This is actually the update of the existing documents that we have in SONiC, because the feature itself is already implemented in SONiC, and it is used for the, let's say, getting information about the legacy SONiC resources. And we are going to add Dash-specific objects to the existing implementation. But what is worth noting that we are not changing any flows. So the implementation and all the flows of the CRM will remain the same as it is right now in SONiC. So yeah, as you can see, this is like partial update of the document. Let's switch to like the
regular view.
And the regular view, yeah. By the way, how deep do you want to go over this document? Do you want to review the entire document or only the parts that are related to Dash?
I think, Prince, what do you think? I'm thinking maybe the part that relates to Dash, and then if there are questions, go back in depth.
I agree.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so that would be good, but maybe for the for clarifying the CRM and the functionality to the folks who are not aware, maybe Sasha, you can give a quick or introduction to the CRM feature and how that applies to the to different objects, and then we can go to the Dash part, right? Because
Okay. So let's go over the requirements and the basic functionality. So basically, the detailed description of critical resources monitoring feature requirements is available here in a link. So at the high level, CRM should log the message if there are any of resources that exceed defined the threshold, and CLI we should have a CLI command that allows us to check the current usage of the available and availability of the monitored resources. So basically, feature allow us to get the available resources from the SI and from the hardware, and it also is responsible for counting the used resources inside the SONiC. So the SI itself provides only the number of available resources, and it is not responsible for counting of the used resources. This is responsibility of the SONiC. In a legacy SONiC, we have different type of resources. It's like routes, next hop neighbors, next hop group members, ACLs, FDB, and I think that there are a couple of more resources that we are monitoring in SONiC, but they are not part of this document. So the document wasn't updated. And for the Dash, we are going to add VNet, ENI, ENI Ethernet address, inbound routes, outbound routes, CA2PA, PA validation, ICL groups, and ICL rules. Let's go quickly over the monitoring process requirements. So the monitoring process should periodically poll PSI counters for all required resources. Then it should check whether retrieved values exceeds the defined thresholds and log appropriate syslog message. The user should be able to configure low and high thresholds. The user should be able to configure thresholds in the following formats. So we can configure the percentage, or actual used count, or actual free counts. By default, the thresholds are configured in percentage. CRM feature should log syslog message if there are any resources that exceeds low or high thresholds. CRM should support two types of syslog messages. The first one is exceeded for the high threshold, and the second one is clear for the low threshold. Syslog messages should be in the following format. So the format we have warning, threshold exceeded, for the high threshold, threshold type, used count, and free count. And the same for clear threshold, threshold type, used count, and free count. And the threshold type can be in percentage, used, or free.
Right.
The default polling interval should be set to 5 minutes. Default high threshold should be set to 85%, and default low threshold should be set to 70%. So it's the same for Dash. CRM features should suppress the syslog message after predicting them 10 times, so to not overflow the syslog with the same messages, so it will stop printing after 10 times. Do you have any questions on this? Okay.
None from me. Anyone else? Keep going.
Yeah, I think basically this is a feature already there in SONiC, and
Yep.
there is this frequent monitoring of these resources, and also throwing these alert messages with which we can identify if any resource is exceeding some thresholds and those things. So I think this is basically adding on top of the existing feature the new objects, right? Like the new Dash
Yeah,
objects.
that's correct.
Great. Yeah,
Uh,
thank you.
So what we
Sorry,
have,
the thresholds are configurable, right? Or is it
Yeah.
set 85, 70?
they are configurable. The default values are set to 85 and 70%, but there is a CLI. It is possible to configure it through directly through JSON file through config.db, or there is a CLI that allows to configure the polling interval, the threshold types for each individual resource or for all resources.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go over what we are adding here for the Dash. So we have a configuration DB, and in configuration DB we have a CRM table. This table contains the polling interval and the configuration for the each resource, the configuration of the threshold type, the configuration of low threshold, and the configuration of high threshold. And basically we have exactly the same for the Dash. So we have for each Dash object that we support, we have the threshold type configuration in the config.db. We have low threshold configuration and we have high threshold configuration. So this is just an extension. The format is the same. The input values are the same.
So Sasha, some of the resources in Dash, it's ENI specific, right? So, for example, the ACL groups or ACL rules. So, looks like this one is kind of a global resource monitoring.
The configuration of the thresholds and threshold type is the global. So there is no possibility to configure it per ENI. Yeah, but the counter in the CRM stats will be per ENI.
Okay.
Basically, yeah. Let's go over the stats.db. Let me. Yeah. So we have next one. We have CounterDB, and in the CounterDB we have CRM stats table. In the CRM stats we have we have statistic for the Dash. We have the VNet used available. So basically, each counter for each object we have 3 counters. We have available. We have 2 counters. Sorry, available and used. And for each Dash object, we have 2 of those counters in the same way as we have for the legacy objects. And we have additional table that contains Dash ICL group stats. And in this Dash ICL group stats, we have the rules used and available per each Dash ICL group. And Prince, regarding the ICL groups per ENI, I need to check. I need to double check this because right now I'm not sure that it is covered here, that we have ICL groups per ENI. So I will check this and come back with the answer.
Okay.
Okay, so the orchestration agent implementation. So we basically just went over the requirements. So inside the org agent, we have CRM org class that implements all the logic, and it is responsible for querying the resources, counting the used resources, and for the sending messages to syslog when the threshold is exceeded. From SAI point of view, we have the following mapping from the CRM resources to the SAI objects. We have Dash VNet, we have Dash ENI, we have ENI Ethernet address, inbound routes, PA validation, outbound CA to PA, ICL group, and ICL rules. From CLI point of view, so we are going to reuse the same utility for the Dash. We are not going to implement new one, so everything will be in one place. We can configure the polling interval. We can configure threshold for type and high-low value for all resources at once, and we can configure the thresholds per individual resource. And we have also show command, show utility, and this utility can print the summary in which it will display the polling interval, and it can show information about resources. This command will print information about used and available resources, and it can print the configured thresholds. And in context of Dash, so we are going to extend the utility with the following commands. For each Dash object, we are going to implement like the command that will allow us to configure the threshold, like the type and low and high value. And also we are going to implement the show, extend the show utility, and we will be able to print the information about Dash resources about the configured thresholds. What is worth noting here that the Dash commands will be available only on the devices with switch type
SONiC on
DPU. So we are not going to confuse the switch SONiC users, and we are not going to show the those commands there. So they will be available only under the DPU. And regarding the legacy resources configuration in the DPU, they are not required. So the vendors are not required to implement the SAI API for all those objects. The CRM org agent on the start will ask the SAI about supported resources, and if SAI will report that some of the resources are not supported, it won't query it in the runtime. So for all the legacy resources, the GPU SAI implementation should return not supported error.
No, I think, Sasha, that part I think we can leave it to the SAI vendor implementation, right? Because these can be treated as the underlay resource as well, right? So if some vendor returns some supported values, then I think these can be used for that, even though it's not applicable. But
Yeah.
but we don't need to, like, block in the CRM polling these counters like based on the DPU or
we are not going to block. The CRM will query the resource at the initialization. And if SAI returns not supported for some of the resources, one or more, it will not try to query it in the runtime. So there is no point to query the resources that are not supported. This is completely up to the vendor implementation, which resource should be supported and which not. Okay, so we can move on with this. So we have CRM Dash CRM config utility syntax for Dash API and Dash attributes. We have show utility syntax here. And what is also we are going to extend is Young model. In general, the Young model for the CRM in the SONiC is the following. So we have the definition of the types. So we have threshold type for the threshold. We have type for the polling interval, and for each legacy resource that we have in the SONiC, we have the following schema. So for each resource, we have the threshold type, we have high threshold and low threshold. And this is going to be remaining without changes. So what we are going to do for the dash, so for the dash threshold, for the dash resources, we also want to allow to the Young model to pass the dash thresholds only if the SONiC is running on the DPU. So in the Young model, we are going to check the switch type on which we are running, and if the switch type is not DPU, so we are not going to allow to configure the thresholds for the dash. So this is the main difference. Yeah, and this is basically it. So we have a flows definition here. If you want, we can go over flows that we have in SONiC, but in general, we already discussed this. So we have the configuration DB, and we have the sum of the resource. So we can take as an example the VNI. So the VNI is created with the dash. It will be not the configuration DB, it will be application DB. But the logic inside the org agent is the same. So we have configurations that is pushed into the database. We are going to receive the notification inside the org agent. Org agent will get this notification. It will update the appropriate CRM resources counter as used. CRM used counter will increment CRM used counter inside its implementation. And then in a loop, we are going to get the CRM available counter per each object that we have. We are going to update the available counters in the CRM table, in the counters DB, in the stats DB. We are going to update the use counters in the counters DB, and per each resource, we are going to check whether the use counter exceeds the low threshold. If yes, then we will send a clear message into syslog. Check if the use counter exceeds a high threshold. And then we will send the log message to syslog. We will increase a counter of log message to track if we printed less than 10 messages into syslog, and will basically sleep for the polling interval timeout to before the next iteration. Do you have any questions on this?
None from me. Anyone else?
Okay, so we can go over quickly over the CRM CLI config. So we have user as an actor. User is going to implement the CLI command. We will call appropriate SONiC utilities script. From the SONiC utilities script, we will parse the command. We will process the data and modify appropriate attribute in the config DB, and will notify org agent about the change, and org agent will consume the changed configuration and updates its internal state. Yeah, and we have CRM CLI show. So again, the user is as an actor executes the show command. CLI is calling appropriate SONiC utilities script, and from this script we are going to get the thresholds configuration if it is needed, and or we are going to get the counters from the counters database if it is needed, format an output, and display this output to the user. From the testing requirements point of view, so we are going to extend unit test. The existing unit test will be extended to cover the Dash resources, and basically the test cases will be reused the same as we have right now. So talking in general, so this will be to verify CRM config commands per each config commands that we have, to verify that we can change the type, low and high thresholds, and to verify that show commands display the correct values for the threshold and for the resources. And we also going to extend virtual switch tests. So on top of the existing test, we will implement the new test for the Dash resources. And again, we are going to reuse the same test cases that are implemented for the existing legacy resources. So in general, the test flow will be the following: to configure the threshold, to create Dash entries in the application DB to exceed the high threshold, verifies that the threshold exceeded message is written to syslog, verifies that the threshold used counter from the syslog message matches the created entries, remove Dash entries to fall above the low threshold, verifies that threshold clear message is written into syslog, and verifies that the used counter from the syslog message matches the created entries. And from system test cases points of view, from SONiC management test point of view, we again going to extend the existing test cases. We are going to reuse the existing test cases and extend them to cover the Dash resources, but the same methodology will be used for the Dash resources as we have for the legacy objects right now. Yes, so this is basically it from my side. Do you have any questions?
Hi, Alexandra. I have one generic question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it common to use Dash word for Dash specific commands in SONiC? I mean, for all stuff that we add for Dash? Because I'm trying to understand. I'm guessing that some CRM resources, which is valid for ASIC, I mean for switching silicon, will be valid for Dash case as well, no?
So we are trying to group all of them. So all the resources that are coming from Dash extension header file inside will be covered under Dash subgroup inside the CLI utilities, inside the config and the show utilities. And I don't think that those resources might be reused in the switch in some way. So they are only DPU specific.
Yeah, but I mean, in case of DPU, some resources will be still common with switch case, right?
So yeah, all the basic resources, all the let's say legacy resources that we have right now, they still will be available in the DPU as well.
So looks like we need to use two different approaches to configure, let's say, thresholds for Dash case.
So first of all these resources, all the legacy resources are, let's say, optional in the DPU, because so we are not going to configure, for example, the legacy resources, and this is what the legacy ICL resources, and this is why we separated them into two different groups. So we have like the legacy ICL that we use in the switch, And here we have dash ICL, which are completely different ICL resources and completely different ICL objects. So we intentionally moved them into a separate group. And for example, if we take from the let's say road or neighbor point of view, there is no real need to monitor those resources inside the DPU, because from the requirements, what I understand, we are going to have only a couple of routes. It's like 1 or 2 routes and up to 2 neighbors inside the DPU, and we are not going to have like a high usage of those resources. So they are here. We still can configure them if they are supported by the SI implementation of the particular vendor, but they are not very meaningful. But still, the approach to configure them is the same as it was before. So you can configure any of these resources, of those resources, if they are supported by the vendor, or you can still configure all the resources at once on the DPU, having all command, and it will be it will configure the thresholds for all resources that are available in the DPU.
I see. Thank you.
And this is a huge PR. Thank you.
There is I saw PA validation, etc. Just wondering if the thresholds that we have right now is for the policy tables that are SDN managed only, or do we also have connection tracking table? I didn't see it. Maybe it's there.
Connection tracking is not part of this design document yet.
Why is that?
But it will be added here when we have the implementation for the connection tracking. So it is also part of the plan.
Okay, great. And also these tables, if they are displayed from global standpoint, that's fine, but we still need, like Prince was mentioning, ENI based values as well.
I agree. I think that I need to check this, and I will update the document accordingly. So.
I have a question. I joined a little bit late. Apologize, Oleksandr. Question is it fair to say, based on the question the previous caller had, right, about common thresholds versus dash specific data types or object type thresholds, right? Is it fair to say over time, if we want to establish more dash specific thresholds, we will extend the CLI to include dash? And whenever it's in common, it'll be in common, or we'll break apart, or we will straddle both. I wasn't very clear about the answer you gave.
I think that we need to stick to some particular approach, and my suggestion is the following. So if there are objects that are coming from the dash extension in the SI, I suggest to put them all under the dash subgroup in those utilities. And the reason is here the following. We don't want to expose the dash resources into the Ethernet switch SONiC. So
right.
If they are all sitting as a separate subgroup, it is possible for us to disable them in runtime, because the implementation basically is going to be the same for the switch SONiC and for the DPU SONiC. But we can add some additional logic in those utilities that will allow us to get the switch type or the type of the running device, and to enable or disable dash commands based on this type. So this is why it is good to have everything under that is related to dash under the dash subgroup.
I mean, maybe you should put a small note or a blurb above in this document. That way, people who continue to work on it over time may have it. Maybe it's already captured, but
yeah, it's actually here. So
okay.
By the way, is it
and
the same for other features behind the CRM?
basically, the CRM is the only feature right now that has some connection to the existing utilities in the SONiC, because all the REST functionalities that we have right now is not going through configuration DB, it is going through application DB, and it will be configured by GNMI. So the CRM right now is the only feature, and I don't see any new features in the near future that will be sitting inside the config DB and that will require the modification of the existing commands in the SONiC. So it's like the first use case.
I got it. Thank you.
I think there is also logging. I didn't look into that, but logging is also per SI API, and I'm not sure we want to do it to again expose Dash API's log level setting for SONiC switch. So that would be second one. Other than that, I don't think there is anything else.
So that was a pretty big one to take in. Are the next steps looking for comments, or are we going to pretty much merge prints? Or Sasha?
So I'm going to I'm pasting the link to the pull request here in the chat. So as an action item, I have the question from Prince about the ACL group per ENI. So I will check this question and I will update document if needed. So I think basically that it should be covered, and we should be able to provide the statistic per ENI, but I will double check. And I think the next week we can merge this document, and I'm also going to start working on the implementation as WSS.
One clarification. You mentioned ACL per ENI, but what about the rest of the things? Or rest of the tables? Are they also going to be displayed per ENI, or threshold, etc., like routes or any table?
So from the top of my memory, I remember that we have the ACL groups. We have ACL rules that are going to be displayed per ACL group. So because we have some certain limitation of how many rules we can create in each group, and all the other are global resources, so they are not tied to anything else.
How about routes? Because it's a large number. It will be good to display,
that routes right now, at least in the existing requirements that I got, they should be like displayed the global value, not tied to any other object. But we can double check. Marian, what do you think about this?
The way that it is defined right now, it looks similar to routes in the switch with VRFs. there is no separation, and unless there is a case where someone implements routes in multiple tables per ENI actually. So there is actually a limit to where you can add a route for one ENI, but you cannot add a route for another ENI, which is not how generally this table is defined and is supposed to behave. So it will be displayed as one big table.
So definitely, we don't want to carve out the route table per ENI and keep that dynamic for sure. So what you're saying is that if there is a when we cross the threshold value, it is the resource that is lacking in the overall table. So it's okay to just display it globally rather than per ENI.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that sounds okay.
Okay, I also just checked about the ICL groups. ICL groups right now are also defined as a global resource, so it is not tied to the ENI.
I see. Okay.
So yeah, if again, if this is need to be updated, we need to discuss this.
So there is, I recall there is resource count for ACL rules, which are per group.
Per group, yeah, this is correct, and this is how it is described right now in the design document. But the ICL groups are global resources, so they are not tied to.
And I think that's expected, no? Because we can print. Isn't that right? That we can just take one group, attach to multiple ENIs.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not like,
possible. That's possible.
okay. So why should we display ACL groups? Because even when we create ACL group, we don't tie it to ENI. It's created outside of ENI context. We only after attach it to ENI. So I don't even know how we can tell ahead of time how many groups can you create if a group is not created for ENI. It's created kind of outside of or separate.
So you're saying you don't see the need for it then, Marian?
Yeah, and I don't see how
Yeah.
we can even provide
Do.
this kind of information from the API, looking at the API alone.
Got it.
Okay, so if there are no other comments, I think that we are good to merge this design update.
Yeah, this is amazing. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I almost feel like giving 13 minutes back because this is so much to take in. Did anyone else have a PR or something they wanted to cover today? We only have maybe 13 minutes left. Or anything you wanted to talk about? Then I think I don't hear anything. I think we're done for the day then, if that works for you guys, and maybe we can get a coffee break and stuff before our next meeting.
Sounds good.
Can I get a yes? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah. Sasha, thank you so much for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.